process next. Oh, thank you so much, whoever hit record. All right, Lamont, hello, good morning.
Hello, welcome everyone. Well, we got a really good, exciting office hours for today, and we are very fortunate to have our app partners who bring tremendous expertise around data, especially racial equity data, and they were involved with helping Cal ICH develop the system performance measures and building out all the data shells and things for that, which I just learned that word recently, the data shells. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn it over to Apt, and they're gonna walk us through the data really well. And y'all don't hesitate to ask questions. And then after Apt does their piece, we'll do this little scenario game just to clarify and make sure that everyone is in real good understanding. And then whatever time we have left, we'll go into the breakout rooms so you all can have some thought partnership with your coaches. But we're not gonna rush Apt with the data because we know it's a lot. And so we're gonna take that really slow. So Apt, please take as much time as you need. Folks, if you have any data questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate. Apt has been very involved in these system performance measures with Cal ICH. So I'm gonna turn it over to the lovely Aubrey, Luis, and Melissa.
Thank you very much, Lamont. Hi, everybody. I'm Aubrey Sittler. I use she, her pronouns. I'm white, and I work for Apt, as Lamont said. I think just some big picture framing to offer for this office hours session is, as you know, you all are working really hard to get your racial equity goals for your SPMs, your system performance measures, written by June 30th. This TA team is working on doing outreach to folks. Maybe you've gotten that outreach. Maybe you're still waiting to hear from your coaches, just to see how things are going, to see what questions you have. And for those of us who started to do that outreach, we've been getting a lot of questions back from folks specifically about their data and specifically about that baseline data that Cal ICH distributed that comes from HDIS, and kind of how to read it or what to do with suppressed data or what data quality issues there might be and kind of how to move through those when you're setting your goals. And I think we wanted to open up the space today and on this office hours call to make sure that folks felt supported in understanding how to navigate those things. But also we've been hearing a lot of common themes from various communities. And so pretty confident that if we start kind of just giving a big picture overview of what the data shells look like and what those data include, that it might help alleviate some of the questions that people have. And then if anyone has specific questions, I guarantee that there's probably another community on the call that could benefit from hearing those questions and those answers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa Stevenson, my colleague, who helped to develop those baseline data shells and can give you all an explanation of kind of what they are. Melissa, if you also want to just talk a little bit about data quality stuff and what the suppressed data indicates or means, that would probably be helpful. I think you guys are going to have to look at a blank table shell instead of an actual COCs, just because we don't have permission to share specific COCs data necessarily. But Melissa, I will hand it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Aubrey. So yes, as Aubrey mentioned, I am going to share a blank template with no data in it. It just bear in mind that the template may have. Oh, thanks, Robert. Well, I already have this loaded up, but if we need to see actual numbers, I will share Santa Cruz's. I'll have to pull that down, but I appreciate that. I didn't want anyone to get upset if we share their actual data. But this template there might be some slight differences that in the actual template from what was the final version that you received, but overall it's mostly the same. So just if there's wording changes, that would be the main difference. And I don't want to go through every single measure in the calculation because I know that I've already met with a lot of you. You may have communicated with us via email about the top line measures. And this forum is really about setting your equity goals, right? Which are related to how the overall outcome goal measures are calculated, but I don't want to derail the conversation too much. But in general, for those who aren't familiar yet, the baseline data table shells that every community should have received, and I believe has received so far, and I know many of you have already gone through them and we've already talked about them. Hopefully you've been on some of the other office hours that CalICH has hosted about the data and the HAP application. So it starts with, well, first there's a glossary that has some definitions of key terms. And then there's the table for the HAP3 table for outcome goals tab. That's a copy of the table 4 that is found in the application or the application supplement, forget the exact terminology, that you will submit for HAP3 funding or for HAP3. So the outcome goals, the top line ones here, you see outcome goal 1A, reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness. Those goals, and for each one at the top here is for all people that the goal affects, right? And those are used, those goals, and how you perform on those goals in the end of or during fiscal year 2024 will affect bonus funding. Now, there's also the related goals for underserved populations and populations disproportionately impacted by homelessness, or I think as we are referring to them, the equity goals. So for each top line outcome goal, you're supposed to set a goal focused on a population, which is up to you to choose, that you can see in your data is disproportionately impacted by homelessness or underserved by the homelessness response system. So, so that being said, while we do provide, and I'll show you the tab that has the breakout of each of these goals, each of these measures by different race, ethnicities, as well as some other subpopulations. There's household types, gender, age. You are welcome to use other data. And I know that becomes important for some communities where you may have missing data for some of these. So we'll get to that. So I don't think we want to talk through how each goal is calculated in this forum. If you do want that information, you can reach back out to CalICH and schedule a meeting, a TA meeting to go through the baseline data calculations, which would probably be with me. But CalICH wants to handle all the routing. So if you go back to them. So I'll just focus on what impacts these equity goals, especially when you take these numbers and then you break them down into populations, the numbers get smaller. And then you can really see where there might be some missing data, right? So that's where I know it's been getting a little tricky for a lot of communities to set their related equity goals. So I will say, though, in general, one thing that has come up a lot, and missing data impacts this, is that for all non-residential project types, which includes street outreach, as well as coordinated entry, day shelters, services only projects, or other projects, any that aren't your typical shelter, transitional housing, permanent housing projects, where people aren't staying in a unit with the provider in a project where we know when they're coming in and out. You do need to have information on their current living situation in HMIS to be counted in the measure. So, and I see John has raised his hand. So, but I just to say, and I know I've talked about this with some of you probably already, some of you probably already know this, but if you don't, that might be why some of the numbers for street outreach, or if you're looking at the breakdown of who's experiencing homelessness and you see there aren't large numbers of coordinated entry folks or other services only projects, they look lower than you expect. It's probably because you might be missing that information. Now, this is a common data quality issue. It's not, you're not in trouble for not having it, but we highly encourage you to complete that information. It is recommended by HUD that all those projects have that information because we really don't know if the people in those projects are still experiencing homelessness if we don't know what their current living situation is. You know, you would expect most people enrolled in street outreach are experiencing homelessness. However, because people, providers often lose contact with them, the outreach workers don't see them every day. Maybe they don't see them for months at a time. They don't know where they've been or where they went. And then the enrollments stay open a lot of the time. So we can't definitively say that that person is still experiencing homelessness if they have an enrollment that has been open, but there's been no contact with them for a very long time, right? And similarly with the other types of projects, because they're not explicitly only, I mean, we expect them to mostly be serving people who are experiencing homelessness, but they might not be. Some people might be doubled up. They might be in other situations. They might have found housing and we just don't know about it, right? So that's why ICH is using that data point. So that is just something to keep in mind throughout the entire baseline data measures, including when you look at the data for the different subpopulations as well. John, did you have a question?
I just wanted to flag the question that Emmanuel Sanchez put in the chat. And I'm not sure exactly what this refers to, but I know it's a critical question. Mm-hmm. This does not necessarily mean BIPOC population, correct? And I'm not sure which part of the table Emmanuel was referring to, but I just wanted to flag that for you.
I can go ahead and I guess ask that question again. Here locally, because our population is mostly made out of Hispanics, over 90%, I just wanted to make sure, and because we only have so much data for the rest of the races, obviously, mm-hmm. that if we do see that the actual disproportionate population is actually white Caucasian, and that does not fit into the BIPOC definition, that we can use white Caucasian as a disproportionate population in our cases. That's what I was trying to ask.
So, I mean, the language around the goals, around the related goals, equity goals, is underserved and disproportionately impacted. So, I mean, I you know, often when we're talking about equity goals, we are talking about how these systems impact people who are BIPOC, but it is true that you know, the intent of the goal, and every community is going to look different, right, is how you would address disparities for an underserved or disproportionately impacted population. You know, there's no explicit language I've seen anywhere that you can't mention, you know, white people there. I don't know if the rest of the group who's been working on the equity project longer has any thoughts on that. I'm just gonna, and while you're thinking about that, if anyone wants to jump in, but I'm gonna go to that tab that breaks out the data by, and you know, there's no numbers here, that breaks out the data by population. Yes, that's a good point. Maybe that's a good thing to talk about in one of the breakout rooms on your specific setting your goals. It's also hard to say without looking at your actual data right now, if that's really, you know, it's not just, oh, there are fewer white people in the system than Black people, right? It's more about how those numbers for each measure compare to either the overall population, the population in poverty, people who are in the system versus how many are exiting, right? Are some populations more likely to exit? Are some more likely to return? So there are a lot of different factors to think about. Or do you think maybe there are more people out there who aren't even in the system, so they're underserved? That would also be something you might want to look at, right? But I will say though, you know, if you look on the Measure 7 population groups detail tab in this file, it breaks out each of the measures, and you'll see here in your files the numbers that fall into each of these subpopulations or household types, race or ethnic groups from each measure. Then you can really start to drill down on what's going on in the system. And definitely, if you have questions about your specific data or specific communities experience, that would be good for I think the breakout sessions as well. But it isn't, you know, obviously race and ethnicity is a big factor and something that I think a lot of communities are going to look at, but there are other ways to break down the data as well. For example, obviously gender and household composition, maybe families with children are not exiting as quickly, or maybe single adults aren't. And then there are also, if you scroll all the way down here, also thinking about people experiencing mental illness or substance use disorders, veterans, you know, and the rest that you see. Youth is always something that folks like to look at, people who are fleeing domestic violence. So unfortunately, we don't have the crosstabs of these different populations with race and ethnicity in the data we have here. That would also be, if you have data on that, that might be something you want to think about as well, because different populations are affected by these mental and medical and substance use disorders probably differently. So those are also things to think about. But in terms of data, missing data, because I know that's what everyone's curious about, there is a state privacy policy regulation, not sure exactly, that they cannot share numbers of people where the value represents fewer than 11 people. So that doesn't apply to the PIT count because, and you can't see any numbers here, but the PIT count is already public. It's already published by HUD. So that was not suppressed. However, you might see, and I know a lot of communities have this, especially when you get to measures where the top line numbers get smaller and smaller, especially with the street outreach exits, where you're already looking at a small number. And then when you start to break it down, you wind up with a lot of values that are less than 11, especially if you're a smaller COC as well. So I do understand it makes things difficult. I can tell you, and I've told some other communities, is it does mean it's a small number. So you know that. You can't calculate an actual percentage, but you know that it's less than 11 people. And it's not zero, because we wouldn't, you wouldn't see a suppression if it were zero. So that's, the reality, just based on the state's laws. We can't share that number. If you have other data available, whether you have access to HMIS reports, depending on the measure, it could be the LSA, the SPM, that's the HUD system performance measures. Other reports you can run out of HMIS, or if you have a relationship with the COC or the HMIS administrator, if they can run it. Obviously every community has a different setup, so I can't say what's possible. Or if you have other data that you know on the system, I would encourage you to use that if you are missing a significant amount of data, because the state does require that you set these goals for each measure. I think that covers a lot. Is there anything else you think, Nastasia, or anyone else? Lamont, any other things you want to answer?
I do. Thank you, Melissa. This has been so good. If you go back to, I see that Robert's hand raised. So we'll take questions from the communities, and then I have some questions for you all, to things that would be nice to reiterate. Mr. Robert.
Thank you, Lamont. My question is more general. I'm feeling like for us to make progress, we've got to have, this is really great information, and it's being processed at the state level when we transmit our HMIS data to you, but it's only being done on a fairly infrequent basis. So for me to feel more confident that we're making progress, I guess I'm wondering, like, how can we, or can we, get this process data in this format on a more regular basis, and what the plans are around that? It's kind of a feedback loop. Any continuous quality improvement kind of process, you got to look at the information more than every year to make progress, in my experience.
Yes, that's a great question. Yes, so we are working APT, slightly different group of folks from APT, but the same general team are working with the state on what that reporting process will look like. That's definitely in the works. It's not something that's on the back burner. I don't have the exact timeline or what it will look like. Most likely it will be a spreadsheet like this. It might be slightly different, but you will be getting definitely 2021 data. I mean, part of it is there is a lag between when there's your HMIS data, obviously then has to go into HDIS, right? And it's not like as soon as the quarter ends, the data goes right in, right? There's even on the HMIS side, there might be a data cleaning process, data entry, data that needs to get entered. So there's a little bit of a lag there. And then the data has to get in HDIS, and then there's a little bit of cleanup that happens on their end. And then we would pull, or they would pull potentially, the data out. So, but we are in the works to get 2021. And then I'm not exactly sure what it'll look like going forward, but you will be getting updated data in some form. There's no plan for just leaving you completely, in a lurch here. But that's a great question.
Yes, thank you for that question, Robert. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Any other questions? Don't hold back. I see Dr. Rajni.
Yeah, I had a great question come through with, many of the data systems, again, including, if we're going through and using the PIT or using any of the systems that we've been talking about for data, being kind of incomplete in nature and having some equity issues, should that be contextualized within these tables, or does that not need to be? Somebody's asking, right? So if we're going to really kind of push equity forward, if we're using data that is not equitable, how do we handle that?
That is a great question. I think, the section of the table, table 4, where communities set their, the equity goals, they use a longer phrase, but the equity goals are, it's more of a text field, right? It's more open for you to explain what's why you're setting the goal that way. And it gives communities a lot of latitude around how they describe it and describe the population and why. So that might be something you want to address there as well. If you're thinking there's just equity issues even in the data that's collected, which is a great point and something that definitely you would want to address. Now you do have to talk about how you're going to set an equity goal for those measures, but I think missing data comes up throughout, even in the top line measures. A lot of communities have talked about how their measure 1A, that big number of people experiencing homelessness, even that is just missing. They know that's short. They know there are more people out there who are experiencing homelessness. They're just not in the system. They're basically unserved or unserved by projects in HMIS anyway. So that comes up a lot. And if you're expanding the system, that number is going to go up, but that also means more people are being served. So you might want to also think about that around your equity goals. We just know there are certain populations are just not being served as much. Improving data collection and reporting for certain groups. I think that's a great goal. I don't know if it fits neatly into the HAP application. That might be a good question for Cal ICH, and we can certainly bring that back to them. I don't think it's a bad goal for you to have, though. I think it's a great goal. We definitely want to improve the equity of data itself, right? And just improve the coverage of HMIS, improve the number of people being served by the system that we know there are more people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness out there. But again, it's hard to say where that would fit into the application, but it might be something you talk about when you're setting your equity goal in those boxes in table 4. And then there's other parts of the application as well. There's a narrative. So it's not just this table 4, although I've been mostly focused on the table 4 part of the application.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and that was my comment too. So it's good to hear that affirmed is, there are places to provide that context. And I do think that's important if we're moving equity, with integrity within this work to kind of name that, right, and lift that up in spaces. And so, yeah, and just let us know if you need help with language as well as you all are working. Thanks for that.
Yes, these are good questions. And I think, did we address Luisa's if data integrity is a serious concern? Would it be acceptable to have a goal? Can you guys hear me?
You were cutting it out a little bit for me.
We just talked about that one, Lamont, but I think Jeff has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, I see that. Jeff, I think we spoke a while ago, but I'm a little, I might be misremembering. This spreadsheet is something that all the grantees should have received. Cal ICH sent it out. So I don't know their distribution list, but, and so Jeff, can you remind me, are you with the county, or are you their TA provider?
I'm part of I'm a part-time consultant to the COC Davis Woodland.
So the applicant communities, which again can vary, right? The county, if there's a city, if there are multiple counties, they would have received this data, yes. And I haven't heard that anyone has not received it, unless there is one COC that doesn't upload to HDIS. But other than that one COC, I haven't heard anything. So they should definitely have it.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to go through if I missed any questions.
Let's see, are there any other questions? Oh, there's a question here. Oh, I think that's one that we might have to get. That someone privated a question regarding, has Cal ICH answered the question about the numbers of people served increasing if outreach is improved? Does this hurt their bonus? Melissa, I don't know if you have any updates.
So they have said, actually, no, yeah, and that's a good question for the group, because I've been trying to communicate this to all the communities I've talked to during TA calls. You're talking about this 1A here, I think, where it does say outcome goal 1A, reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness, but the state has said on a number of calls, I think pretty publicly, so it shouldn't be a secret that for this goal for the annual number of people experiencing homelessness, you can set that as an increase. And that's why in this box here, it says decrease / increase in the number of people. So this goal is the only one where they're kind of giving you that option. So it is true that when you get down to the newly homeless, that is not an increase is not an option, but for this top line one, that is possible, and you would want to contextualize that. And they did, I believe, put out an updated template for the actual application that should have a space for that. It should be on their website, and I can look maybe when we're in the breakout rooms if I can find it. So that, yeah, that's definitely acceptable.
So if I understand you correctly, Melissa, for that outcome goal, reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness, regarding the bonus, you may choose to have a decrease, but you may be amplifying your outreach. And so you know, and in your racial and social equity goal, is also going to be strengthening your outreach. So you know that you're probably going to see an increase. So it could be a decrease or an increase, and your bonus is going to be measured upon the goal that you set, either an increase or a decrease. Is that right, Melissa?
Yes, that is right. So yeah, a lot of communities have asked, they know that they're either missing folks in the system or they're missing folks in HMIS because they didn't, have all their, coordinated entry data in correctly. So they know that the numbers will go up when they improve both their outreach to folks who aren't being served and when they improve their data quality as well. So I think that would also impact your equity goals as well. If you know there's certain populations that the reason their numbers are low is not because they are less likely to experience homelessness, but because they are less likely to be served by these programs, then I think that's definitely something you want to talk about in this table and in your application.
That's really helpful. And remember, Victor and Amber with Cal ICH, they mentioned that regarding your bonus and incentive, they're really going to be looking at that general outcome goal that you set. But if you set really good racial and social equity goals, it's going to increase your likelihood of achieving your general goal because of all the disparities. So really think about how your racial and social equity goal can increase your likelihood of achieving that general goal. So we got some more questions coming in for you, Melissa. This next one, folks are asking, where can this table be downloaded? So it seems like some folks need the link.
Mm-hmm. So if you mean your COCs or your community's data, that is not that's not uploaded somewhere for everyone to access, but the state should have Cal ICH through. It should have come through the email that's HHAP at, I forget the exact email address, but BCSH or something like that. That it should have come from there. If you mean the blank tables for the application, I can put into, and I think they may have emailed that as well, but it is also available on, and I think I've lost the web page which I had open. I'm gonna. This is the main link, just so everyone has it.
I can paste it, Melissa.
Oh, okay, great.
You got it.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on here, but if you look, and I don't know if you can, I'm never sure which screen I'm sharing, but but there's application resources under HAP round 3. It is table 4 in the supplement.
And you're really going to want the ones that has sent from Cal ICH that already has your community's data in it. And so if you don't have that, Nastasia is going to put our Cal Real email, and just make sure that when you email us, mark it urgent and let us know that you need your, your data table with your data, and then we will make sure to connect with Cal ICH and get that to you. Or you can directly email your contact at Cal ICH. Or you can do both, right?
Yeah. You can email everyone you can think of. We'll get it to you somehow.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rajni, for putting it there. So you see our email, cal-real-ta@techinc.org. Email us, put an urgent on that so we can get that to you all right away. Nastasia.
Thank you. There was a question about the use of different data outcomes and data tools that can be used to influence the goals. So for example, I think this question is about, can folks use a combination of the HDIS data, point in time, Stella, HMIS, and other comparable data to generate the goals?
So for the equity goals, and I was trying to find if this language was written down in one of the many documents on that website I just shared, but definitely the messaging from the state has been that you do not have to use this baseline data to set the equity goals, and that last tab, that measure 7, is really provided there to help you set them, but it is not a requirement that you use exactly is what is on that tab. Some folks that's going to be the only data they have available to them, and other communities are going to have a lot more, whether it's from other required reporting to HUD or some internal systems they may have, or internal research or data tracking they do. And the state is not forcing you to use this data for the equity goal. Just to be clear though, I know this is about the equity goals, but for the top line goals, they are going to be measuring you on this data from HDIS though. So that, that's the way it's set up. That's why your baseline data is being pulled in from HDIS, meaning like these boxes up here, not the big box down here. So these boxes up here. So that they are going to use the baseline data from these spreadsheets for 2020, and then compare it to what comes out of HDIS for fiscal year 2024, just to be clear. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, Melissa. So that question has been coming up a lot. Some of the coaches have been seeing that come up a lot with their communities. So we definitely want to underscore that one again. And so what I'm hearing Melissa say is that for your general outcome goal, for example, when you look here, it says reducing the number of persons experiencing homelessness. That baseline data must come from the HDIS, Homelessness Data Integration System. And when they look at your progress for bonus or incentive funding, they will be also using HDIS. But what I'm hearing Melissa say, for your racial and social equity goal, you can use other forms of data sources, such as Stella P. You could use the COC racial equity and ethnicity data analysis tool, point in time count, or maybe some other data source that your community has. So for the racial equity goal, social equity goals, you are free to use other data sources. But for that general system performance goal, it's HDIS. Melissa, connected to that one that we were from a community. I'm hesitant to create a racial or social equity goal because it is illegal to have a racial equity or to target a certain group, that violates fair housing, and it's inappropriate to have a racial or social equity goal. If a community is saying that, Melissa, what is your response?
I am not aware of setting goals violating fair housing. I work in homelessness data, but I wouldn't say I'm a housing expert. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. I don't think the state would be asking for these goals if, especially California, if it were a violation of fair housing. And they've been pretty, I mean, a lot of their regulations and their rules are probably at a higher level than even the federal government. You know, we're not saying that you're prioritizing a certain group for a certain resource, right? It's not like if you have you know, unlimited subsidy funds and you're only giving it to a certain group. I think that, yeah, that's not what we're saying. This is more about, you know, and even some of the interventions that you might do to help, you know, groups or any group or overall. It doesn't necessarily have to be something like, oh, we're going to give out like X amount of dollars in subsidies, or, you know what I mean? We're going to enroll X number of people in a program, right? There are a lot of different things you could be doing that maybe everyone would benefit from, but it would specifically benefit certain people more, right? Like if you set up a prevention program and you're not limiting it to a certain group, but you think that would really help a certain, you know, it would just, for lots of reasons, impact a certain population more. And I'm just, you know, speaking off the cuff here, but so don't take what I say as legal advice. But yeah, I don't think this goal setting process is, and maybe someone is more of an expert in fair housing than I am. Aubrey.
I'm happy to chime in from the like coordinated entry fair housing perspective, if that would be helpful. Melissa, what you said was right on point, even though you were speaking on the cuff, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, fair housing protects people from being discriminated against based on protected characteristics like race, like gender identity, like sexual orientation, and a number of other kind of characteristics. But setting a goal is not in and of itself violating fair housing. And in fact, you're strongly encouraged by HUD and by the state of California to set goals that will advance racial equity, LGBTQ equity, social equity for other identities and experiences. It's the strategies that you employ as a response to what that goal is that you need to pay attention to make sure you're not violating fair housing and other civil rights laws. So if you want to, you know, say, increase the number, decrease the length of time that a certain race or gender identity of people is experiencing homelessness before they move into permanent housing. It would be a violation of fair housing to have a project that is only serving those groups of people and discriminating against people who don't have those gender identities or racial identities as like who they're enrolling. But it would not be illegal to try to take a look at why there are, you know, people of certain racial identities or gender identities are experiencing homelessness for longer periods of time than their white counterparts or than their cisgender counterparts or their male counterparts or whatever it might be, and come up with that kind of targeted universalist approach of figuring out how to address the concerns that are leading to that disparity. And then, as Melissa said, that would likely benefit everybody in the program as well. And so as those kinds of implementation things are going on, you know, we can certainly consult with folks, I think, on kind of holding that balance and being equitable without just straight up discriminating.
Well, thank you for that, Aubrey and Melissa. And yeah, it's something that we would definitely be able to help you all with in phase 2. As you're developing your racial equity goals right now, and like Melissa mentioned and Aubrey mentioned, it is not illegal, it is not in violation to have targeted racial and social equity goals. And as you develop your interventions and strategies, we'd be able to support you because it's not illegal to develop targeted strategies to remove those persistent drivers that drive racial and social inequities. So just some encouragement, you'll be seeing things from Cal ICH about support that's going to be offered in phase 2 to help you all in implementing your goals and developing your strategies. Rashima.
Thank you, Lamont. And thank you, Melissa, for that. So I can break it down in plain language for myself. So when I'm working with my communities. So I had this come up with one of my communities and I suggested targeted universalism because it's not leaving anyone out, but we are targeting this specific community or population. And so you're saying it's not illegal in a sense that as long as it's not only for that population and it includes other, but we're just prioritizing, then that's absolutely fine. Because I just want to make sure before I check that box off.
Yeah, I think the spirit of what you're saying, Rashima, is true. Like when we talk about target universalism, like what Aubrey mentioned, and when we watched the video and the workshop that we had, for example, all students to achieve reading proficiency. But we know that groups are different, that groups are situated differently in relation to the power and resources in America because of structural racism, because of heterosexism, because of ableism, cisgenderism, sexism. You know, you can name all the different forms and intersections of oppression. So different groups sit differently. And so if you do a universal approach, it will typically benefit the dominant groups and other groups will get left behind, and it will widen racial and social disparities. So in that example, when they looked at reading proficiency, they noticed that a lot of the groups were doing well, but it was the Latinx group that was falling behind. And so the targeted intervention that they did was to provide materials that supported English as a second language learners and other supports, right? And then they notice a dramatic result, right? So it's not that you're benefiting one group over another. You want to reduce the disparities across the board, but you're looking at what groups are experiencing severe disparities, and you're developing interventions that are culturally specific, that are co-developed by communities most impacted, so that we don't see these unwinding disparities. And even in some communities around the nation, they have looked at their vulnerability assessment tool, because again, when we look at the VI-SPDAT, right, we know that the VI-SPDAT is inherently biased because it's a universal tool that was developed, you know, in Boston by a researcher that was really around mostly chronically homeless white men. And we want chronically homeless white men to get housing, but the tool doesn't do a good job of assessing other groups, right? Because people respond differently to those questions. Black and Indigenous and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander groups and other groups have a lot of historical distrust with medical systems, so they may not be diagnosed with a disability, right? And so that's why we have to have targeted strategies to reduce these barriers so that everyone gets housing is our goal. Thank you, Rashima, for bringing that up. Any other questions that folks have? Okay, so I'm going to throw out a scenario. We've done such a good job with talking through so much of the stuff already. But say, Melissa and Aubrey, that a community is coming to you and they're saying, you know, regarding the racial equity and social equity part of the outcome goal, HDIS doesn't have any good data. So I can't, there's nothing that I can use to find good data because I can't get this disaggregated data. It's not in my baseline. It's not there. So I can't come up with anything. What would you say, Melissa, to a community that's struggling to find good racial and social equity data and they don't, and they're not getting that in HDIS?
That's a great question. So I would start with, you know, every community, every grantee, which are a lot of, you know, I know a lot of you are counties, has a different relationship with the COC, but I would, you know, the state really wants applicants to work with the COC. And I know that your COCs should have, I mean, unless there's no one in HMIS, but they really should have data from other reports that that the COC is required to submit to HUD. You know, and there is also publicly available PIT data, which, you know, it's not exactly the same as these measures because they span a year, and the point in time, PIT is the point in time count, which is submitted to HUD annually. And that does break out, it's not as detailed as this, but it does have race, ethnicity, gender, age, and a few other subpopulation data as well. So I would, that is a resource that if you really have nothing else, that would be, if I were in your position, that is what I would use. I would hope that you could work with the COC on accessing other information. There's also the report, I think was mentioned at some point, called the LSA, the longitudinal system analysis, which also comes out of HMIS, but it's for an entire year, which is submitted to HUD annually. And that information should be available to the COC. So someone else mentioned Stella P, which is Stellar Performance Module. That, if you don't know, is something that it's a tool, online tool that takes usually the LSA data and has lots of graphics and visualizations, charts, and definitely race, ethnicity, gender, youth, veterans, serious mental illness and substance use disorders. All information on all those groups is in there. And you would be able to look at that to see, to identify disparities. And that was really developed for that. A lot of that information is really meant to be used for this sort of process. It's slightly different than what's in HDIS or what's coming out of HDIS in the measures, but that I think could be very helpful if you can get access to any information from there. It is supposed to be, they are supposed to be trackable goals. So if you have other information on the system, your system, I would encourage you to use that. But there are a lot of resources out there outside of HDIS.
Thank you, Melissa. Any questions community folks got? There was one other thing that came up too. I know many of you in your communities, you may have already had to submit your data because you have to get like a board approval or a COC approval or your council or some other jurisdictional approval. Know that these goals are living goals and you do have a 90-day period to be able to make revisions. So you could still be creative. You could still be going through this process. Even though you may already have something submitted, you still could be rethinking this critically and making refinements, because you can make revisions, right, within that period. And also, for those of you that as you're doing this, you might realize, oh my God, I have to get this approved by the COC board, and they're not going to meet until July 7th, and it's due June 30th. Don't freak out. Submit your goal and just make the notation that is subject to COC or board or whatever that jurisdiction. Still submit it by June 30th, but be sure that you make a notation to Cal ICH that this is subject to whatever jurisdictional or COC board approval. Because you still have that 90-day period if your board or whatever comes back and say something, that you could still make that change too. Emmanuel.
Good morning, Lamont. Quick question for you. Will you guys be going over the goals once they're submitted to the state? Will your group be reviewing those, or how is that gonna work?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Emmanuel. So we don't have to formally, so there's 110 of you all, right? And we're here to support you wherever you're at. Some communities are gonna need light touch support. They're like, no, we got this. You know, we've been working with our own equity folks and we're all good. Some of you may want us to review it and get feedback, but we are here for you all, whatever you need. So you could have our coaches review your goals and we could provide feedback. You can come to office hours. A lot of our office hours moving forward, you're gonna have more small group time. So you can come into office hours and share some of your goals to get some quick feedback. Or all of the coaches should have reached out to you all. So check your email. So you know who your point of contact coach is. So that particular coach, you can contact them and say, hey, could you give me some feedback on this? And that coach is going to know if they can't provide that expertise and feedback, they may connect you with someone from NCH, the National Coalition of the Homeless, who's a part of our collaborative, to give you some feedback on something. Or they may connect you to apps or connect you with someone with TAC or Gilvar Consulting or any one of our partners that are here at this table. So we're here as much as you need us, Emmanuel. Dr. Rajni.
Yes, thank you, Lamont. This is such wonderful discussion today. So great questions, everybody. Just wanted to kind of re-emphasize, Lamont, I think you brought up such an important point with the living dynamic goals. And somebody kind of said, you know, it's nerve-wracking because if we're stuck with this and then we get data that shows us something else, you know, how do we handle that? And I think that, you know, this is a dynamic process. And anytime we're doing equity work, we're, you know, revisiting, right? And making adaptations as needed. That's really healthy and part of this. And I think the 90-day grace is also really important to note as well. So I think as folks are working through these goals, you know, don't feel so stuck. It's dynamic, it's living. I think that is really, really important to remember. And for us to also engage in practice as we do equity work. So I just was glad you pointed that out, Lamont. And for those of you who need a little more help around kind of understanding what is a living goal and what does that include, you know, our coaches, all of us are here and we're happy to help.
Yes, thank you. And especially if y'all need help on getting those SMARTY goals, Dr. Rajni is the master at that, I tell you. So we got so many talented folks, racial equity partners as well. And know also that your racial and social equity goal, they're not going to be looking at that in a way to say, oh, if you don't meet that goal, it's going to affect your bonus, right? But I don't want to separate the racial and social equity goal from your general system outcome goal because they're really intertwined. But when Cal ICH looks at giving your community its bonus, they're going to look at that general system performance measure goal. But if you have a really good racial and social equity goal, it's going to increase your likelihood in achieving your general goal. But you don't have to get so caught up, you know what I mean, in the sense of being maybe too extremely worried, right? You still want to have a good racial and social equity goal, but you could really stretch. You could stretch yourself here more. Yeah. One other piece too, and I might be, oh, it slipped my mind. Are there any other questions or comments? Well, y'all are doing the work. You know, I know communities are super busy. Y'all are super busy. Please check your email. Your coaches would have sent you all emails. Some will be calling you. And even if you don't need much support, they just want to know where you're at in the process. Because we want to make sure that we have 100% success in everyone getting their goals and stuff turned in by June 30th. Oh, now I remember. So you don't have to just have a racial equity goal, right? It's also social equity. So think about LGBTQ two-spirit. Think about disabled populations. Think about the really old and the really young, right? Unaccompanied youth and young adults. And think about that intersectionality, right? So one person had a really good goal about looking at increasing supports for unaccompanied youth. But then it'll be nice to disaggregate that data because unaccompanied youth is really broad. We want to support all of our unaccompanied youth, but you might find something even more glaring when you look at race and unaccompanied youth status, or you look at gender and unaccompanied youth status. You may find, oh my God, for our trans Indigenous unaccompanied youth, look at these numbers, right? So you want to think in that way too. And some of you in communities, and we've heard this sometimes too, you know, it's like, well, our community is mostly white, mostly rural, but sometimes you have hidden populations. So you might not show undocumented farm workers may not show up in your HDIS data, or even documented farm workers may not show up in your HDIS data because of distrust with systems. Or there might be indigenous and tribal groups that are not showing up in your HDIS data, but you know that they're there in your community, but they're not showing up in the data. You can also begin to stretch in your racial and social equity goal here as well, right? And especially around increasing And that may make your outcome goal 1 increase, right? This might be an example of where you might have, when we talk about reducing the number of persons experiencing homeless, the annual estimate of number of people accessing services or experiencing homelessness, this outcome goal for you may be an increase because you want to do a better job of reaching documented and undocumented, say, farm worker groups or other hidden populations that may not have trust in the systems, or indigenous, or a greater partnership with your tribal communities who oftentimes they don't do point-in-time counts on those reservations. So I know we are coming close to time. Anastasia, do you have any closing reminders for us? When is our next office hours?
Our next office hours is next week on Tuesday at, oh geez, I'm drawing a blank here. Somebody help me. Next Tuesday, you know what? We'll make sure we send a reminder out. Don't have my calendar up immediately, but we'll see folks next Tuesday. If you all need further
4 to 5 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, you are amazing.
1 p.m.
Yes, 1
Pacific
to
time.
1 Pacific. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
1 Pacific, Tuesday, June 14th. Come prepared. Bring some examples of what you're working on. If you don't have your data table, email cal-real-ta@tacinc.org. So wonderful to see y'all. We'll be sending this recording. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.